forward for people to access. But again, we do appreciate all comments and questions that we receive from the community. We encourage that, and it really is the best way to reach us is that online comment form. And we have been receiving those, and we post them accordingly. So everything is in the packet for the committee to review in addition. Okay, next order of business, we move right on to reports. So the very first item here is the chair report. I'm going to ask Evan if he could pull up a few slides that will hopefully provide some more clarity around our conversation and some of the comments that were received in public comment, as well as some of the questions I've received myself. So again, this is our first attempt at providing clarity around next steps for this building project pause. And I want to be clear that it is a project pause in the sense of the process. And we'll talk more about what that means. And it's really, there will still be engagement by our committee and interaction and discussions. So the very first thing I want to talk about is, the decision that, or the agreement that was reached at the meeting last night, as CJ commented on. So it was really that in that last night's town council meeting, it was agreed to not include the FHS building project on the November ballot and place the project on a temporary pause. The next item is, based on that statement and what we heard last night, until more clarity can be obtained on the impacts the pandemic has presented, the Farmington High School Building Committee will adjust committee operations until a new referendum date can be determined and the full process can be resumed. So this is really us responding to the fact that it is a change in our previously discussed timeline, which was the thought that we would have a referendum in November or in the fall. And we did hear last night that was not the best course of action, and we will be adjusting accordingly based on that change. It does change our milestone timelines as we've discussed and next steps, and that's where we'll be able to provide more information to the community as we move through this process. Okay, we can go right on to the next slide, Devin. So an immediate response to this pause, so something to talk about as far as what we're going to do right now. So in response to the pause and change in referendum date, the building committee will work with our consultants in the weeks ahead to complete the following. So we will continue on this path to complete schematic design. So all the work that we've done to date there was some comment about whether that work will still be valid. It certainly is. The schematic design is a representation of the work that the building committee has done and reflects the comprehensive solution that we all agreed upon and was in the best interest of meeting the statement of needs as drafted by the Board of Ed. So that schematic design process will complete, and we're going to hear more about that tonight with TSKP. In addition, we are going to wrap up open items and any official committee business. So this is really talking about administrative tasks. So we will have some additional work to do right now as far as approving invoices and really making sure administratively that we are in a good place for the committee and that we have fulfilled our obligations with our partners, and making sure that we pause in a place that makes sense and is really a natural pause for the project at this point. We will be working with CSG and TSKB closely on future schedule predictions. So we will hope to come to the table over the next few weeks with a conversation around what do some of these milestones look like, what are our options, where do we have some planning to do, and how do we prepare for those things. So again, additional conversation. Again, we don't have answers for those things tonight, but is continued conversation with the building committee and with CSG and TSKP moving forward over the next few weeks. And one of the key things we need to do is deliver messaging related to the temporary pause. So we also want to be very clear, Town Council did make a general statement last night, and hopefully in our conversation tonight, we will get more detail, but there is more information to come. We need to make sure we're clear with the community as far as what is happening during this pause, all the work that's been done to date. This will include, obviously, any updates to communications we've done so far. So that would be website updates, and it would be an understanding of social media communications. It would be updates and mailings out to the community so they do have a clear understanding, again, of the work that's been done so far and next steps and what this pause does mean. So we know that this is immediate work that we need to do and will be our focus over the next few weeks. So I don't want anybody to think that this work is not being done or that as of tonight, everything is stopping. That is not the case. We know that we need to respond to the pause and to the impacts of those pauses and to the pause. And this is what that's going to look like from now until the beginning of June. So if we go right on to the next slide, we talk a little bit more about future planning. So again, please be patient with us as we have additional conversations as a building committee on next steps around this and how we want to present this information, what it's going to look like. But following the close of our June 10th meeting, so that June 10th meeting is when we are scheduled to do our final administrative tasks that would really close out schematic design. We are going to talk about what the future is going to look like for us in, at least in the very near future. So holding monthly meetings to evaluate new information and respond accordingly. So this is the difference between pausing the project and some of the workings of the project, and understanding that the building committee as we know it will stay engaged, will have touch points moving forward. So again, we will come forward with a schedule prior to our June 10th meeting showing our engagement moving forward. We know that's important to understand information as we hear it. This is not something where all of a sudden we're going to step back and we are not going to discuss and review information and the changes in the environment as they happen. So we know we need to stay engaged in that process. Continue with any communications to the public as necessary. So we will continue our communications committee meetings in tandem with our building committee meetings to make sure, again, that we are responding to information appropriately and getting that information out to the community as we understand how those impacts affect the project and next steps for the project. And we will work closely with Town Council and the Board of Ed to prepare for a new referendum date. So again, this is nothing where we are going to sit back and be idle while we are in the pause of the project itself, as far as the pause really relates to the fact that we will not be on that referendum ballot in November, but we will be planning, we will be having conversations and really evaluating information as we receive it over the next few months. So I'm hoping that this, at least, again, it's not a full, complete picture. There's many details to fill in here, and we will be working with CSG and TSKP to fill in those details and make sure we have a good, solid plan moving forward. But at least, hopefully, it gives people a better understanding and at least a comfort level of what this actually translates into and what it means. So I just wanted to open that up for conversation amongst the committee members, see if they have any other questions or comments around that or discussions.
Megan?
Yep.
Hi, it's Michael. Michael Smith.
Yes.
I like the idea of if I'm hearing you correctly, that we would continue to have meetings, and I understand the economic challenges that leave the probability of a referendum working in the right direction. All those things add up and make sense to do what we're doing now, but I really would find value in continuing to meet so that the community understands that this remains a priority, and that we use perhaps some of the time during this to explore how others are adapting potential physical designs based upon some of the challenges that we've been experiencing recently. I got off the phone today with architects who really presented some very interesting things about how kids can be eating in school and how that may affect the design and the kinds of things that go on in a kitchen, and how the places that students eat in, and this could be a temporary bump in the road, or it may be an opportunity to think thoughtfully about how even the plan that we have in place may, through minor adaptations, create flexibility for a school system to navigate through the kinds of challenges that we're in right now. And I would encourage us, although it doesn't feel as though all the right answers will emerge, to respond to some of the challenges that are going on right now. I would encourage and endorse us, as I think I hear you saying, the importance of continuing to meet and analyze how circumstances are changing, that we need to consider how they affect the plan that ultimately does get finished in schematic and brought forward back to the town council and ultimately to the state and to referendum. So I think, is that what I'm hearing you correctly, that we would continue to keep meeting, and that we also are clearly not endorsing a plan to have a referendum in the fall, and that we're clearly waiting to hear on what some of our new economic situation may be after the collection of taxes and a better sense of how things stand in the fall.
I think that's a combination of what you heard from CJ, as well as how I think it makes sense for the building committee to respond to that information, is to say that, if there's an understanding that this will not be on the ballot in November, and what that means to us as a building committee, it changes our entire milestone schedule. And which is something we need to respond to, and leaves us in a place that we need to learn more about next steps, and when it is appropriate then to set a new referendum date. So that's one part of the conversation. And then the second part is, I do believe, for several reasons, that it's important for us to continue meeting as a committee. I think it's important that we stay engaged to make sure that we're part of that planning process towards a new referendum date. I think it's important for us to meet to make sure that we're communicating appropriately and we're sending the messages that we need to send out to the community as they're needed. And I think it's very important for us, as you just mentioned, to kind of take in new information as we know it. That's going to come from many different locations. I think it could be from just general knowledge that we hear, that we're learning more about decisions that are being made all around us, but also decisions that are specific to this project and specific to the town of Farmington. So, I think that's why we need town council as part of that, and Board of Ed information, that we can kind of synthesize all the information that we know as we learn it, and see what kind of impact that has, and if we can use that to help us make a decision and figure out when is the best time to reset that referendum date with the help of town council and Board of Ed.
Megan, do you think it would be helpful if you were to meet with CJ and perhaps draft something that in hearing his comments tonight, it sounds like there may be consensus around I don't doubt what he's saying in terms of there's consensus around the support for the project and a need to adjust the timeline. Would it be valuable for whatever you and he may find in common agreement to bring that back to the town council and actually have them discuss and perhaps either through an affirmation of a vote, indicate all the things that you and he are saying? Because I think they're all valid. And I think as a matter of process, that would be helpful to for the town, and I think for our own committee, to feel the level of shared commitment about how we can navigate going forward. Is that as a process? Would that make sense? Would that help clarify a unified vision and a level of commitment from the town council about how we might approach forward?
It's certainly something that I can address if we feel it's appropriate. I think that from the conversation last night and what I heard during the town council as far as conversation, you know, there was nothing that I heard as far as an objection to the pause. But that's something certainly that I could talk to CJ about if we feel that there's further clarification required.
I guess my reason for bringing it up is that in what I heard last night, it sounded like Chris was introducing that in his committee report that we were taking a pause. And I think, as I understand it, we've been requested, reasonably so, by the town council to consider the economic circumstances that we're in and how that affects our timeline. But I do think that it would be helpful for our benefit as a committee to understand clearly what it is that's being asked of us to adapt, rather than it being a report of which I just think if we're, and I sense that we're in agreement, that it would be helpful to make it clear to everybody what that agreement is and what the time frame is and the reasons why it's, so that there isn't any confusion around it, because it did. What I'm hearing today is a lot more, is articulated more clearly than I think it was all coming out last night. And I attach nothing other than the fact that there's so much going on right now, and lots of balls to juggle, and we're all doing our best to figure out how to keep all the balls in the air when there's a lot to be done. So for whatever it's worth, it's something to consider.
All right, I appreciate that, Michael, the comments, and that's certainly something that we can continue some conversations on as far as next steps. Any other building committee comments on what you've heard tonight, or any other thoughts they'd like to share specifically around this before we move on in the agenda?
Hey, it's Garth.
Yes,
I can make a quick comment. I'd like to piggyback what Mike was talking about with the design, and I think the committee going forward, I think that a lot of this time can be used for, you know, looking into how we can make this design work for what happens when we come out of this. So I think it could be a benefit. So I think that, I know Michael and Tai Sue and Richard will be probably scratching. They're going to be working with us and really working and trying to figure out what this is going to look like on the outside too. So, but I think that their design is also adaptable, because by looking at it. So I think that that's a good thing. I think that there's a lot of things that they can do with it, and we can do with it, and the town can do with it, to make it adaptable so that it works within whatever comes out of the other side. So Michael Smith brought up an interesting point about the kitchen. That's something that I don't know. So maybe, you know, that point is something that needs to be driven a little bit deeper. So, but I think that that's a really good point. And I think going forward, I think that if we could, for the committee to really start looking into other avenues of keeping us busy and by doing other things to make this an even better building if we can. So let's use this time to our benefit and not just call it a pause, but, call it a betterment. We're going to make this building even better. So let's get a positive feeling about it, because I think we all know that this building needs to be done. The timing of it is a little bit impossible right now. I think it's, as CJ said, with not knowing what our tax implications are going to look like, this would be a project that would look pretty poorly, I think, to a lot of the townspeople. So I think we have to look at that and just keep us prepared and be ready to go when it's just on the flip side. So that's my comment. Thanks.
Thanks, Garth.
Hi, Megan, it's Ellen.
Yes,
Sayuda. First of all, I want to thank CJ Thomas for being at the meeting tonight and providing some clarity to the pause. I know it was came as a surprise to the community and to some others. And as CJ said, what would be important to me, because of the obvious reasons of the pause are uncertain economic times, I really, I want to set up something to make sure, in whatever committee it's through, whether in our small working groups or communications or if we're meeting as a committee, I think it's going to be really important to get economic updates about what's going on, certainly in our town. And this is something potentially the town manager's office, Joe Swetsky, our finance director, could help us with. But I really feel, because the pause is due to uncertain economics and budget concerns, and I certainly appreciate that, I think it's imperative that we are updated pretty regularly, or as much as possible, because I truly believe there's information out there on our state and federal stimulus dollars, where we stand, are they coming, just as on the town level, our tax revenue. So I just think, because we are pausing because of that, I would like to see regular updates how our economic forecast is going in town. Thank you.
Thanks, Ellen. I think that's something we can, when we're putting together kind of this more detailed schedule, that's something that we can include as that new and important information that's required for us to evaluate as we move through the process.
Thank you.
Yep. Any other thoughts? Okay. I appreciate the comments, the feedback. Again, I think I appreciate CJ providing his feedback as well around this process. I think this, for all of us, is learning experience. And I think, as Michael Smith, said, so many balls in the air, things we need to determine and make decisions on. And working collaboratively, I think, is an important part of the process. And I really do think we've been doing a great job with that. So we continue to move in that direction. I think that's kind of the key to our success, making sure we continue to do that we're making decisions, as we have said, with our guiding principles based on, making milestone decisions based on information as we know it, has been one of our guiding principles. I think we continue to do that. It has worked for us so far, got us to the point in this project, I think, that we can all be proud of the schematic design that we're finalizing here. So again, I think there's a lot of pieces to this puzzle that we're all trying to fit together. And I think we can do that in a way that makes sense, and it's going to be have a good understanding of all the impacts and things that are happening around us. So again, some patience to make sure we can get some of these details right and get a really good forward-looking plan for the project, but know that the building committee will stay engaged. We will obviously do our best to keep the community informed, and that we do appreciate your support in that effort. And as always, we'll you know, appreciate any comments or thoughts you have as we continue forward. So, okay. Next order of business is Communications Subcommittee report. Kathy, do you want to provide an update on that?
Sure. We met this morning. We're small, but a wonderful group of people working on communication. We went over Town Council's agreement on the temporary pause, talked about that for a while. When we went through our agenda, we decided, you know, the survey is something that we would put on hold. But moving forward and thinking about what we can do during this time, we're going to continue with the video tour, side-by-side photos, continuing to update the website. Also, we're going to keep meeting once a month to touch base and to discuss ways in which we can communicate. We also talked about having an item in the town newsletter and in the board summer newsletter, just touching base with our community about the Farmington High School Building Committee. So we are absolutely still moving forward with communications, and it was a productive meeting this morning. Just, you know, because I'm talking right now, I know that we're going to continue meeting, but it feels like a moment where I just want to thank everyone for your commitment and support of the FHS school project. You know, I just feel that I'm very proud of the work that we've all accomplished. I'm looking forward to the completion of the schematic design and also starting the work up again when, you know, the time is right. And I love that we're going to continue to meet.
Okay, thank you, Kathy. Any questions from the committee on Communications Subcommittee? Okay, we'll move right into Neighborhood Communications Subcommittee report. I'm going to ask Sharon if she could give us an update.
Yes, the Neighborhood Subcommittee met April 30th from 6:30 to 8. We had a great amount of participation, over 20 participants. Some of the questions and concerns was regarding the berm around the property, as well as the lighting of the parking lot. We also discussed about possibility having a preliminary site package developed so that the neighbors could maybe have some berms set up before the high school is even built so that they could have some privacy. And also there was a request to have some type of project timeline. Overall, Tai-Soo Kim gave a very informative presentation, and the concerns I think were met, and it was very well received.
All right, great, thank you, Sharon. Any questions from the committee on neighborhood communications? Okay. All right, so next order of business is architect report. So I know we do have a presentation, and just to remind everybody before I turn this over to Richard and Michael, but again, if you remember, we're talking about what's on task right now and schematic design, and finishing that schematic design is an important part of our process. So that's certainly where we are in the process right now. So keep that in mind, obviously, as we move forward. So I'm going to, at this time, turn this right over to Richard and Michael for the architect report.
Great, thanks very much, Meg. So this evening, we do want to focus on giving you an update on cost. The last time that we spoke with you, we had some reconciliation that we were going through with our professional cost estimator, PM&C. And we've gone through that cost estimate in great detail. We wanted to make sure that it was fully vetted. So we have gone through that process. And Michael, in a little while, will walk you through where we are in terms of total project. He'll also remind you of where we were at the beginning of the year, and then the direction that we were given by the town council. And then you may remember that on April 1st, I think it was on April 1st, when I said we have some notion of how to bring the project back within the town council's target. I told you don't write these ideas down, but you probably did. And then we have continued to confirm that now with our professional cost estimator. So Michael will give you a report on how those cost-saving ideas have actually played out. And then you may also recall that there were a number of adds that we were talking about adding to the project, whether they were photovoltaics or geothermal or some other features. So he's going to report on those adds and make some recommendation on how to proceed forward when you're ready to proceed forward. We know you owe the town council a response to their recommendation for cost cutting. So when you are ready, we can help you frame those recommendations when we go back before the town council. So where are we right now? Well, we're nearly finished with schematic design. I know that you're going to be having another meeting or two following this meeting. What we would like to do is package that schematic design. As you know, we've done a lot of studies. We've got a lot of material. We want to make sure that we present it in a form that is publishable and that is available for people to download, to make sure that that information is available to the public. But we have a couple of things still to tidy up in that schematic design. You may recall that we were talking to you about some site changes. We came to the conclusion that it's not possible to have enough space on the site to have 8 tennis courts, plus a softball field, plus additional parking, plus the 1928 building. Something had to go, and we kicked around different ideas, and I think where we've landed is to place the tennis courts up in the footprint of the former building, roughly where the student parking is, the back entrance, if you will, to the building. So we do need to finish up that site work and make that part of our schematic package, which we will deliver to you in the next meeting or two. I do want to respond to the observations that Michael Smith made. And he specifically mentioned the kitchen. What are architects doing in response to COVID-19 when it comes to school planning? And I will tell you, Michael, and members of the committee, that this is a subject that is being talked about a lot right now in the industry. I've been doing my own research. Right now, the state of Connecticut doesn't have any guidelines about it as far as school planning is concerned. We're also doing work in Massachusetts, and the Massachusetts School Building Authority doesn't have any guidelines on what to do about COVID-19 when it comes to school planning. But just reaching out to industries such as the Association for Learning Environments, of which I am a member, and then looking at AIA information that has been published. In my mind, it seems to be falling into 4 categories of areas that need to be addressed. So I want to share that with you. This is not a formal directive from anybody. It's my personal observations, and you know me enough now by this point that I'm more than willing to share with you my opinions. So the first response, I think, comes in operational considerations. And this is something that Kathy Greeter is probably struggling with right now. What if COVID-19 continues, or God forbid, some other form of pandemic that needs to be taken into account when we open up the building or phase it in? So operationally, you may be thinking about having alternate day sessions or alternate week sessions. That's something, a strategy that sometimes school districts take on when they don't have enough space. And that's the similar situation here. You know, it's not easy to get the distances that you need as one strategy for keeping safe. So then people shift to operational changes. Doubling the size of classrooms is out of the question. I don't think the state's going to be anywhere near reimbursing that sort of strategy. So operational is one area. The second is technologically. What can you do to make distance learning easier, better, more available? And I think your own information technology folks probably have a better idea of what technologically needs to be considered going forward. And that may be reconsideration of the technology budget here. Whether you need to make more devices available for staff and for students, that's a discussion that needs to be had. The third area I see is in facility planning. And the kinds of things that I've been hearing is fresh air ventilation is going to become more critical than ever. That filtration of air is going to become more critical than ever. But going along with that will be energy consumption. You're going to be moving more air and filtering it more. You're also going to be trying to isolate areas so that you're not doing air exchanges between spaces. So that may have an impact. Should you go in that direction, that will have an impact on cost. But we haven't gotten to that point yet. But it's something during the next few months we should be considering, and we can certainly discuss that with Cole or Ronan, our mechanical engineers. Other kinds of things, certainly easily cleanable surfaces and readily available cleaning stations, hand washing stations, is something that we might be considering for the facility plan. And I think the fourth item that as facility planners, we really don't have an impact on, but I've heard discussed is programs that continue to offer social emotional support. I mean, working in isolation, I know that it's very taxing on people, and there has to be an opportunity for those folks to get together, to see each other periodically. Maybe there's a way to create those kinds of spaces, again, through scheduling for that activity to occur. So we're in a whole new world. We're all learning new terms and new words, but going forward, I think we should continue the discussion about what impact this virus has had on facility planning. So this is to be continued, quite frankly. At this point, what I'd like to do is ask Michael to walk you through our slides. It's not very sexy. It's a lot of numbers, but he is very good at conveying those numbers in an interesting way. So, Michael, if you could continue.
Great, thank you, Richard. So, as Richard alluded, this will be a number-centric presentation. But basically, we took the design out as we captured it through working with you since being selected, and repriced it and updated the estimates. So I'm just going to walk you through this. You'll recall at the end of January, the project budget was $142 million in round numbers. This was a project cost that was made up of fees for the architects and engineers, other professional fees, the construction cost, any alternates moving forward, what we call a fit out budget for furniture, equipment, and technology, and then an owner's contingency, which is always good to have to cover unknowns as the project progresses. You'll also recall that of that $142 million, working with CSG, approximately 20% of that is reimbursable by the state, which created a number that is meaningful to all your taxpayers as the net town share. In this case, back in January, it was $114 million. You'll also recall that bringing that recommendation forward as an all-new building as designed by TSKP for a net cost to town of $114 million. The recommendation back from the town council was that the building committee should try everything it could do to make the net cost to town between 105 and 110 million. And on February 4th, that became our charge. Working the design forward, as well as targeting that budget. You'll recall that we made a recommendation to you back in April of some potential cost reductions that could be brought to the overall project. And we felt that that could get the net cost to town down below 109 million. You may recall that among the things that were on the table was a reduction in square footage, removing the green roof that was in the budget, the softball field, the cupola rehabilitation, and perhaps reducing the furniture, equipment, and IT budget. That move is reflected in this line item here. So big numbers from February 2020 down to April. We went from 114 and we were hoping to get to 100 and just below 109 million. We redocumented the entire project, developed the drawings in more detail, developed the narratives in more detail, and sent it out to our cost estimator, who spent several weeks running through the numbers, generating a cost estimate. We vetted that estimate with our estimator and with CSG to what we see as a new cost of the project here. And you'll see that we fell short of our target by a little under $1 million. But let me just run through this in round numbers so that you can track it. There is no change across these various snapshots to the professional fees or the architect and engineer fees at this time. At this point in time, we're not talking about alternates. We're just trying to compare apples to apples between what was presented to the town council and what we would represent to the town council. We did target that budget reduction in FF&E and IT. And the owner's contingency came down, but that's only because these costs all came down. This is a fixed % of the project cost. So it's a pro rata reduction. Similarly, the reimbursement from the state comes down as the project cost comes down. All things being equal, here with a more developed project, we were short of where we hoped to be when we presented our strategy in April, but we are nevertheless below the threshold presented by town council. And the cuts that we had made to the project in order to achieve this are not at the cost of the educational specification or frankly the quality of the construction really at this time. They were targeted reductions to yield that result. I want to develop this line item further, the alternates, and show you that what we presented to the cost estimator as potential alternates to the project. And they're numerous. These are items that we developed in conversation with the building committee since February. Here are the alternates. And they number 1 through 8 with some variations. When you look at this, it's broken down to construction cost, project cost, and then cost to town. Construction cost is what the general contractor or CM is going to charge you for these items. The project cost is is a slightly increased version of that because of all the other factors that are brought to bear on elements in the construction. And then a rounded cost to town is many of these alternates are reimbursable by the school construction grant program, and therefore will be less of a tax burden on your citizens. So the motorized partition between the gym is, in round numbers, $100,000. The stone veneer in lieu of masonry, as we showed it to you in our last presentation, came in at a little over $500,000. The cost to mothball the 1928 building, and this is a net add, the baseline that we priced with the cost estimator matched the baseline that we presented to town council, which was to abate and demolish the 1928 building. Rather than to do that, it is a net add of $1 million to the project. You'll notice that this number is highlighted in red because monies associated with the cost of doing that work will most likely not be reimbursable under the state school construction grant program. That is because the 1928 building will not be repurposed as an element of the educational specification, and therefore must reside outside the school construction grant. There's a more robust alternate here to fully renovate the 1928 building for some future use. And here the target was to renovate it for an office or educational use. That's sort of the quality benchmark that we're looking at. You'll see that that's just under $10 million. That does everything that's done in the mothball building, plus get all of the finishes, systems, roof, envelope, up to a 20-year life cycle standard. So it's a rather extensive renovation. It's 30,000 square feet. It's $10 million. The fourth alternate is to do a future softball field or incorporate it as an alternate. And this is $250,000 in round numbers. This is much less than we had previously expected it to be. 5.1 and 5.2 are additional energy saving initiatives that could be brought to bear on the project. The baseline for the project is a building that conforms to Connecticut's high performance building standard, which was adopted by the state school construction grant program almost 10 years ago. And it essentially means you're going to build the new building so that it complies more or less with what would be called a LEED Silver accreditation, which is a good benchmark. Many institutional clients use that as their baseline. And as we've told you in the past, the new building, even though it's considerably more square footage and is fully air conditioned and will likely operate at least 11 months out of the year at that capacity, because it's designed to meet this high performance standard, it will cost the town less to operate than your current facility. So it is already a well-performing and efficient building. That said, we grouped the additional energy savings into two groups. Those elements that may have a less than 20-year payback or return on their investment, and came up with a number that was about $2/3 million. This would be for systems like ice storage, which allows you to generate ice in the evenings when electricity is cheaper, and you store that so that when you run the air conditioner in the summer afternoon or the September afternoon when the electricity is more expensive, you can burn down the ice that you made overnight. And it includes things like modular chillers, which can come online selectively depending on the load that's required of them. The next energy savings alternate is something that gets us much closer to net zero. And this is to reconfigure the entire physical plant so that the building puts as much energy, generates as much energy as it consumes. And to do that, we would locate a geothermal field, an array of geothermal wells up on the upper fields, convert the heating and cooling plants to a geothermal plant, and put a large PV array on the roof and distribute it across the site, such that over the course of the year, the PV array would generate as much kilowatts as the building would be consuming. And that came in at a net cost town of about $9 million. Again, this number is higher than perhaps we had anticipated, but is priced pretty precisely so that we understand all of the elements of the physical plant that need to switch over for that to occur. Alternate 6 was the improvements to Route 4. The baseline project includes improvements for Monteith from the top of the hill down to the bottom of the hill. This work is to rework the intersection at Monteith and Route 4 and to change the signal. And in working with with the town's professional staff on this, we were able to get a scope of work that not only made sense for the project, but would also dovetail well should the town ever decide to move forward with the river crossing, which would also occur at that intersection. In other words, we would hate to do work on Route 4 and, you know, even 10 years down the road, have to go back and rework the new work that we put in at Route 4 based on a good design with a bridge crossing for the river. So this number is larger than we've previously reported to you. And at the time of the competition, we had thought these improvements would be around $440,000, and you can see we've well exceeded that. But this is based on what we now believe is required as far as shifting the center line of that road, getting sufficient queuing space in the right-hand turning lanes, left-hand turning lanes, and really to make this happen in a way that protects all future possibilities for that intersection. Alternate 7 is for universal design. And this essentially reflects the idea that we would, the town would carry the professional fees of a third-party consultant to monitor and advise the design work, as well as to help advocate for these initiatives beyond what we would provide in order to meet the building standards of the building code and the town zoning ordinance. And alternate 8, lastly, returns that $500,000 that we took from the previous budget and carries it as an alternate if you wanted to preserve the ability to purchase additional furniture, equipment, and technology for the project within date. I just want to return to Route 4 improvements because I failed to highlight to you that this number 2 is in red because improvements to Route 4, again, will likely not be reimbursable by the state school construction grant program, as those improvements reside outside the limits of the school parcel. So I don't think you would do all of these alternates. You certainly, these two are mutually exclusive, as are these two are mutually exclusive. So therefore, the idea is what to do with these alternates. So borrowing a page from Richard's book, I went ahead and essentially scored each of these alternates and created for you what would represent, I believe, the design team's recommendation of what to do with these alternates. And essentially, there are 4 buckets that you can put these alternates in. The first bucket, very simply, is to not make it an alternate and to include it in the project scope. Just say this is so important, it needs to be part of the baseline. The second bucket to put it in, rather than include it, is to remove it from the project scope. Say, you know what, this no longer is perhaps pertinent to the educational mission or the town's priority, and therefore we're just going to set it aside and no longer track it. So those are 2 pretty good binary options to do with the alternates, and just flip of the switch. And then there's some things you can do that are in the middle between those 2 extremes. And the first one is simply to carry it as an add alternate all the way through bid date. This allows it to be tracked as a project desire and potential need, or a nice to have. And essentially you carry it as far as the committee wishes to carry it up to bid date, and perhaps even past bid date. And once you've allotted and awarded these packages and you really understand what the economy is telling you for the prices that you're purchasing these scopes of work for and how your budget is holding up, you can selectively decide down the road to pull the trigger on them. And then lastly, the 4th bucket would be to simply create them, to present them as a line item to the referendum, and let your town citizenry tell you whether it's important enough to them to carry them forward. And we've seen other of your peer towns do that for high school building referenda. So there's a base referendum. The town should build this school for $142 million. And then there's a couple of other sentences that can be independently voted up or down about other project features and their associated costs. So you can see here what I've done is I've advised that the motorized partition is a really great idea and could be carried as an alternate until very far into the project. Frankly, you could bid this as an alternate to a construction manager, and he or she could advise you 3, 4, 7 months into construction when the drop dead date is for them to know whether you want to incorporate this in the project. So you could get the bids out of the way and maybe even some of the preliminary site work and understand how your unforeseens are holding up before you pledge this money towards the motorized partition. The stone masonry, working with part of the building committee and the working group, I think what we've decided to do here is to greatly reduce the extent of the stone veneer, focus on that front elevation, and carry that number forward as an add alternate. Again, maybe as far as till the project is bid, and just see how the prices are holding up. As a order of magnitude, stone along the front would be about a third of this cost if you carried it forward as an alternate. For alternate 3, I think it would be up for discussion which one you would rather do. I do think had we not all gone on quarantine, we would we had anticipated engaging town governance, town staff, and your citizens more deeply to try to identify a good use for a renovated 1928 building. And I know that TSKP was not able to do that to the extent that they had hoped to as recently as February. But nevertheless, when you figure out which of these 2 you want to do, I think you could just carry it as a line item below the line of the school referendum as to what and let your town citizens decide. Number 4, the additional softball field. TSKP's recommendation here is to simply remove it from the scope. The softball field is something that we brought forward as part of our competition response. It at the time didn't reside in the ed spec. It's not something that you have right now on the field. And as Richard alluded to earlier, the site planning issues become much more simple if you can simply pull it off the table, and we can take the area that the softball field would occupy and give the 1928 building a little more room, build more parking, and frankly better laid out parking, and give the tennis courts a little more breathing room as well. For item number 5, again, these are mutually exclusive. You would not do both of these, but again, the idea is you would pick a direction and present it as a line item referendum for the town to decide. 6, the Route 4 improvements. Again, we would carry that as a line item referendum. So if you're scoring at home, we're looking at a referendum that has 4 things that you would decide on. The first one is the big one, whether to build the school. And then the second one would be what to do with the 1928 building. The third would be additional energy saving elements. And the last one would be Route 4 improvements. For 7, universal design, we would simply include this as part of the project at this point in time. It matches the spirit of your zoning ordinance and is a benefit to the project. And the sooner you can bring that third-party consultant on board, the more impact they can have on the design in a way that doesn't impact the cost of the design. And then lastly, for 8, the additional FF&E allowance, we would again recommend carrying this as an alternate. And this one truly could occur very late in the project. You could get all your construction bids in and trades awarded, understand where you are on your furniture bids, and simply make a decision as to whether to spend that extra $420,000 really based on the delivery time of the equipment that you wish to add to the project. So that essentially wraps up the cost issue that we had promised to update you on. What I'd like to do now is listen to some of your comments about the overall project budget plus this alternate page, And then that will help us finalize the schematic design deliverable to you, which we look forward to presenting to you at the end of May. Thank you.
Michael, John Carrier, just a couple of quick questions. And before I say that, thank you. This was an amazing presentation and kind of brings all of the moving parts and the additional stuff into perspective. Just quickly on the net zero, you provided some costs, construction costs, and then you provide some, true costs of the town, which includes reimbursements from the states. Does that include any additional rebates that would come from utilities, et cetera? And then if I apologize if I missed it, I know that the first line item had a less than a 10-year payback. Did you guys estimate the payback on the larger package?
Okay, so as far as rebates, these do not include additional rebates, and that's a good question. I think what we need to do is understand when we anticipate building this building, and then get a better sense of what rebates may be available. That's something that's changed in the 14 years I've been in Connecticut. The rebate program has varied pretty dramatically with the economy of the state. Second thing is the payback periods. The thresholds here between these two, Johnny, are really 20-year paybacks. So the modular chillers have about, I think, a 12 or 13-year payback. The ice storage is much shorter, like 7 years. Because this building, the baseline building is so efficient, the PV arrays take more than 20 years to pay back if you purchase them. And this is based on purchasing them. If we could find a program of some sort of lease that the town was comfortable with, then we could radically change the components in 5.2.
If I can just jump in there, Michael.
Mm-hmm.
If solar panels were to be leased, that's not a reimbursable expense by the state. So that would be, the lease cost would be a town expense.
That's a good clarification, but I think what I mean is that 5.2 contains about $4 million in PV and about $5 million of geothermal. And so as you alter half of its component from a purchase of depreciable assets to a lease of something else, it radically changes the nature of those numbers. But that's something that we could work on and develop more fully for the town. We have to understand the town's appetite to enter into lease agreements as well, and essentially pledge a fixed kilowatt cost for 20 years on the building.
One follow-up question then. Understanding that the geothermal would have to be made pretty early on in the decision making because of the excavation involved, but is the solar arrays, we have to take that into account within the construction documents and the structure on the roofs, or is that something that would be built in?
I think I would try to dissuade you from carrying the PV, for instance, as a bid alternate, or the geothermal as a bid alternate. We could certainly make provisions in the building's architecture to allow for a future geothermal plant or geothermal field, or a future PV array on the roof. Those are easy to do, but to run parallel designs of physical plants through the bid process can become quite complicated.
Johnny,
And
so I want to underscore what Michael is saying. It's absolutely true. If you could make the decision on geothermal early rather than carrying it as an alternate, it just simplifies matters. Because you're going to have different kinds of mechanical equipment. You don't necessarily need a boiler. You know, you're going to have a different kind of set of equipment. And if you can make the decision early, then the design process is easier. The bidding is less confusing, less chance of an error. So I would agree with what Michael is saying.
right, I would kind of say the opposite about the 5.1. It may be possible to carry ice storage forward as a bid alternate if you wish to do that. In general, it's cleaner if either 5.1 or 5.2 can become a line item on the referendum, and you know from the jump what the community wants, and you roll into design development to make it happen. Gives you much greater control of the variables, and you can land these systems better on the budget and make sure that the bid documents are tight.
Thank you. That's all I had for questions.
And Mike, I have a question, and it kind of aligns with what Johnny had to ask about these future measures. Would there be anything that would make sense to build in to the project if we were, you know, considering photovoltaic in the future? You know, maybe you know, conduit, you know, between the roof deck and the insulation, or you know, curbs built into the roof ahead of time, or maybe even expansion joints designed on the roof that wouldn't, you know, hinder the layout of you know, an efficient layout of a photovoltaic. You know, is there anything that should be included so we're not ripping stuff apart later if we, you know, that's, you know, cost effective. You know, that's something that's not going to blow the budget, just small items that maybe we should consider putting in if we were going to consider the photovoltaic.
Yeah, I mean, you know, once the new building is constructed, in theory, you're going to carry a all new roof that's brand spanking new and has a great warranty on it. And it would be terrible to have to go up there and start cutting holes in it, even 10 years into it, to accommodate a robust PV scenario. So not only would it include sleeves and raceways, but I think you would look at incorporating anchor points that can easily be converted should you want to bring an array system onto the building.
Yeah, Tim, this is Richard. Yeah, that's not unusual. We have done that before, and you would put sleeves in there. You would
Sure.
have a route from the roof down to where you would have a transfer switch at your electric service. So it's very, this is very achievable, and you would have pre-inspection walkthroughs by the photovoltaic installer with the roofing manufacturer's representative, with the contractor who did the roofing, to make sure that anything the photovoltaic people do on the roof does not void the warranty, you know, if they install it after the building is completed. So it is achievable.
Perfect. Thank you.
This is Ellen. I had a question. Michael, on the Route 4 improvements, Owen, as always, terrific presentation, and it's so thorough, and you really, I think you give us really good advice, and it's a testament to how well you've gotten to know our community. I should have asked this question a long time ago on the Route 4 improvements. So there is no, that's a state road. So I just want to clarify, any work there that would not fall under the purview of the state? This might be a question for Mark and or Chris.
Well, this is Richard. I can jump in and tell you what I know. The state will take on state road projects if it's warranted. In other words, if it's justifiable from the state traffic standpoint. In this particular case, after talking with the town engineer, his belief, and I agree, is that the State Department of Transportation would say, oh, this is all very good. You can go ahead and proceed. We'll review it to make sure it meets our standards, but quite frankly, it isn't warranted. It isn't justifiable from a state funding standpoint. So that's why Michael, I think, correctly reported that none of it would be eligible, neither from the State Department of Transportation nor from the education grant process.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, Ellen, just to maybe add a little more complexity to it, because I thought we actually converged to a nice ending point. I will say that in our office, we went back and forth as to what to do with this alternate, because it is probably a needed improvement, most likely a needed improvement, given that the town has already extended quite a bit of investigation on how to remediate the situation. And ultimately, I think our recommendation to carry it forward as a line item in the referendum is that people that are inclined to vote for the school will likely also be inclined to pony in another $750,000 for the Route 4 improvements. I don't think people are going to vote against the school simply based on what it does or doesn't do for Route 4. So it would be a nice to have on the project, probably a need to have on the project, but there's a little bit of strategy as to our idea to put it in as a referendum item.
Well, and I would agree with you, because it's actually much needed now in the year. So agreed. Thank you.
I've got a question for you guys, Garth. Garth Meehan. With all of this, the options on the 28 building, is it going to hinder our referendum to the town if we don't have a decision made on what we're doing with the building? I know we're going to bring that as an option, but it also hinders where, as you said in your presentation, where we're going to put things such as softball fields, parking, and things like that. Do we need to make a kind of a preliminary decision on which way we think we should go with the overall layout? Does that make sense to everyone? I'll bring that up to you guys.
Well, I think we would. I think the existence of the 1928 building is important to a plurality, if not majority, of the town. Perhaps once things return to a more normal situation, we could get better polling on that and better calibrate my assumption. I think we would generate a site plan that preserved the 1928 building and put that forward as part of the referendum. And if that initiative, whether it's to mothball it or to renovate it, did not carry the vote, then I think we would adjust the site plan and as part of our land use permitting, advance a slightly different site plan based on the new information that the 1928 building did not carry forward in the vote. And I think that's fairly acceptable. I don't think we're violating the public trust there. think we do it very openly, and that's how I would recommend proceeding.
Okay. Couldn't that affect some of these initiatives, such as the softball field? I mean, if we, whatever's on the referendum, I don't know. I think.
Yeah, no, I hear what you're saying about the softball field. I mean, it would be possible to recalibrate, should the 1928 building be voted down, to recalibrate the site plan to show a future potential softball field.
Okay.
You could even carry that as an ad alternate if you thought you were going to get good bids along the way. In general, Garth, in removing transparency from my comments, I'm sorry we brought up the softball field during the competition. It's just, the land use issues are easier without it, and therefore we're advising you just to move past it.
I agree.
Okay.
Thank you.
Michael, this is Michael Smith. In reaching a decision from a financial perspective, is there a place where you could carry a number of what it would cost to remove that building?
Remove 1928?
Yes.
Yeah, it is. It's in the 109. It's in this number. The idea is the scheme that we presented to the town council also included the demolition of the 1928 building. Therefore, this is calibrated to be apples to apples. This number, to mothball it, takes the credit for not demolishing it and adds the additional construction that needs to be brought to bear to make it independent from a mechanical plant standpoint and utility standpoint, and to button up the envelope.
Okay, understanding where it exists in the 109, is there a way that you could isolate the actual cost of that? If I'm understanding you correctly, the 1,042,000 is an add back to what the cost of mothballing it is, in addition to the cost of
abating and demolishing it.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yes, I wish I had that number in my back pocket right now, Michael, but I don't. That's easily obtainable. I can, next time we meet, I'll have that number so that we understand essentially the total scope of work here associated with the 1928 building.
Hi, this is Sharon. If the 1928 building was demolished, would we have room for parking, the tennis courts, and the softball field in that specific area?
I suspect that it's close, Sharon.
Okay.
I have not tested that scenario, but that's something that we can do.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it sounds like, to wrap up the schematic design, we need to show both scenarios so that the committee could see that. So in one scenario, the 1928 building remains on the site, and it doesn't matter whether it's mothballed or renovated, it's still on the site.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And the other scenario is remove the 1928 building. Let's say it is a referendum question, and let's say the voters vote that down. Then we would go to the alternate plan, which is putting as much as we can of the school needs on that site. And we'll need to determine whether or not that could accommodate the additional parking, the tennis courts, and the softball field all in that area. But all I can say right now is stay tuned. We can certainly look at that as an alternate site plan.
Okay. And then it would be possible, maybe we would have to move the existing cupola back to the new building, so we would have to add that number back in if that happened.
Good question, whether or not we continue to salvage the cupola
Yes.
or just take a picture of it.
But we talked about in the elevation critique about what else we could do about the imagery of the cupola. But I should also be clear too that the cupola is your current cupola. Why it looks great, on top of the building. If we brought it down to the ground, or in fact move forward with renovating the building, we would essentially need to rebuild the cupola. It's not something that you would restore per se, based on its current condition.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, well, I think I'm going to hand this back over. Not seeing any other questions. I really appreciate it. And I look forward to pulling this all together and re-presenting it to you with Richard next time we're together. Thanks.
Great, thank you, Michael and Richard. I just want to give the building committee any, before we move on to owner's rep report, it sounds like, we're obviously going to get a view of the schematic design package at the next meeting, I believe is the 27th, as we wrap up schematic design right now. So just want to give everybody one last opportunity if you have any other questions or comments to provide to TSKP at this time. Okay. Last of the reports is owner's rep report. So Chris and Mark, any updates from you guys?
Yeah, hi, this is Mark with CSG. I think, Meg, you've already done a great job in sort of highlighting the short-term schedule. Our role will now be to help with those schedule predictions moving forward. We heard the cost estimates today. We will work on those potential schedule predictions and the delivery of the schematic designs for our next meeting, and really working on identifying and reviewing communications moving forward, and then closing up those open items at the middle of June. Just quickly, a little food for thought as we think about moving into the weeks ahead. If we were to continue moving on from this point without a pause, we would be working towards a June submission of our state grant application. A lot of our schedules and our milestones we're working back from that date and back from a referendum date. So as we look to new schedule predictions, we would have to be predicting out some possible referendum dates, what that would mean, what it would mean for our next opportunity at a state grant application, and what it means to present to town council. So for example, we would have taken these recommendations today with the cost estimate, gone back to town council for approval. That's really where we're going to now pick back up again, is when that next town council presentation of cost estimates, alternates, and getting our next charge moving forward as to what we would apply for through that state grant application. And of course, we'll add monthly touch base meetings as we talked about today. We will add the communication meetings moving forward. We'll plug in some town council meetings as possibilities to engage town council. And then we would really need to think about a 90-day period or so before that next referendum date to get really fully back engaged, engage the PAC, and bring TSKP and everybody back in to move forward with communications as we would want to prepare and put our best foot forward towards a referendum. So we will take the schedule that we have currently or previously submitted, and we'll work around that and identify some possible scenarios with milestone dates.
Thanks, Mark. Any questions, comments from the building committee regarding that update? Okay, obviously more to come. We'll have, I think, a lot more information for discussion at our next meeting and details, over the next, several weeks. So again, more information to come, but think about kind of what Mark's talking about next steps, your thoughts around that, so that, we have that information to share and discuss at our next meeting as well. Okay. Next item on the agenda is new business. We do have one piece of new business to complete this evening. So as we have talked about, and we start thinking about some of the administrative things that are required as we complete the end of schematic design and what that means to us. One of the things that you'll see is invoices and us approving those invoices. So the invoice that we have included that Devin's going to pull up here is from TSKP this evening in the amount of $66,046.16. It details out in the invoice exactly what's included in there and the work to date that has been done. So we are going to open microphones back up for us to get a motion to approve the attached invoice from TSKP Studio in the amount of $66,046.16.
Move to accept, Johnny Carrier.
Second it, Sharon.
All right, any discussion? All right, all in favor?
Aye.
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 All opposed? All right, thank you, unanimously approved. Okay. Tonight, I appreciate the comments, not only the public, but from the committee as well. We do have some things to think about, obviously, in preparation for our next meeting. But again, I appreciate everybody's patience through this process as we're learning. But so at this time, I'd like to get a motion for adjournment.
This is Ellen, motion.
Second, Johnny.
Okay, any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Okay, adjourned at 8:21.
Thank you, Meg.
Thank
Thank you,
Meg.
Meg.
Thank you, Meg.
Thank you, everybody. I appreciate the time.
Great job.
Good night.
Thanks, guys.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night, everyone. Thank you.